Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for attending today. We're very excited to have you here. My name is Leila Bonner. I am the Employer Relations Assistant here at Kwantlen Polytechnic University's Career Development Center. We're very excited to be able to chat with you today about wage subsidies, student hiring, and all that good stuff. And to have today's presenter here to give some information about their specific funding program. Before we get into the actual content of today's presentation, I'm just going to run through a little bit of housekeeping and some opening notes about student hiring to kind of set the stage for what we'll be talking about. So we'll start today's session off with a territorial acknowledgement. Here at KPU, we live, work, and study in a region that overlaps with the unceded, traditional, and ancestral First Nations territories of the Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kaikite, and Coquitlam peoples, and with the lands of the Kwantlen First Nation, which gifted its name to our university. The word Kwantlen means tireless runner and is reflected in the university's motto through tireless effort, knowledge, and understanding. In the cause of reconciliation, we at KPU recognize our commitment to address and reduce ongoing systematic colonialism, oppression, and racism that Indigenous peoples continue to experience. All right. So just to set us up and give some context for today's discussion, I'm going to do a really quick overview of what wage subsidies are and what student hiring looks like in terms of cooperative education, which is a term that we're probably going to hear at least a little bit today. So for those who are new to the subject, might be attending this session to learn more about the topic for the first time. Wage subsidies are grants or amounts of funding that help employers to cover the salary cost of bringing on staff. Today we're talking specifically about wage subsidies that apply to bringing on post-secondary students. Each wage subsidy has its own independent criteria and eligibility requirements, regardless of if multiple subsidies receive funding from the same source. So although wage subsidies can get funding from, for example, the same governmental body like the federal or provincial government, or from the same organization even, each subsidy is going to have its own criteria for what constitutes an eligible employer, an eligible student hire, eligible type of job, so on and so forth. One really great example of this is the federal government's funding for the Student Work Placement Program. Student Work Placement Program funding goes towards about 15 to 20 different organizations, but each organization has slightly different criteria for who they actually will give their funding to in terms of applicants and their hires that they're hiring for. Now, with regards to the funding promoted through KPU, all of the subsidies we talk about in this presentation, as well as on our website, are external to Kwantlen and are to be put towards the wage cost of hiring a post-secondary student in part or in full. Most of the wage subsidies that we talk about are to be put towards students in work and learning arrangements, which we'll talk a bit about on the next slide. But some of them can also be put towards just hiring students in general, so anyone who is in the middle of degree-centered learning. There is some differentiation between what the stipulations look like for those types of funding. So whether you're hiring a student in a work and learning opportunity versus hiring just a student in general. But each wage subsidy will provide its own information about their particulars on what that looks like. Finally, as I already mentioned, many of the wage subsidies are for students in work and learning arrangements, specifically cooperative education. And I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. I'm just going to quickly pivot over to our lobby, make sure that people who have not been admitted yet are able to, so bear with me for one moment. There we go. All right. So in terms of cooperative education and work and learning, what actually are we talking about? What does that term mean? Well, work and learning is a bit of an umbrella term for a variety of different types of work arrangements, which are forms of experiential education that formally integrate a student's academic studies with quality experiences within a workplace or practice setting. It's a very complex definition, and that's a lot of words, but basically what it boils down to is work and learning is where a student is gaining work experience in their field before they graduate university. Work and learning includes a lot of different types, a lot of different forms. Cooperative education is one of them, and it happens to be the main one that we tend to promote. But there's also internships, there's apprenticeships, there's practicums, and a whole bunch of other types that you'll likely encounter not just at KPU, but at other university or post-secondary settings. Employers who are hiring for work and learning opportunities are typically hiring for a specific amount of time. In the case of cooperative education, employers would be hiring students for 4, 8, or 12 months worth of work within the student's field of study. When it comes to cooperative education, most universities, at least in BC, although across Canada this is the case for others as well, are accredited by a third party, which denotes what cooperative education actually looks like in terms of how long students have to work for, how many hours they have to fulfill, and so on and so forth. So whatever we require when it comes to those particulars is in line with those third-party requirements, which is why they'll tend to be the same and or similar across universities. Here at KPU, students need 12 months worth of work experience overall to graduate with the designation. So they can work with one employer for part of that time and then work with another employer for the rest of the time, or they can work, the entire 12 months with one employer. That's totally fine. Either or works, but they need to hit at least that 12 months in order to be eligible for the designation at the end of the day. Additionally, all co-op jobs here at KPU align with our academic terms in the sense of they start and stop in alignment with when our terms start and stop. Our terms run from January to April in the spring, from May to August in the summer, and from September to December in the fall. So there's a lot of flexibility for when employers can bring on students. The last point to note, which is something people may or may not know about co-op, is there's no added cost for employers to hire students. Unlike other programs that employers can engage with, hiring a co-op student is free in the sense of we don't have any entrance fees or application fees for employers to take part. There is the expectation that this is a paid work experience for students, so students would be treated as a temporary employee and paid as such, but we don't require any additional cost for employers to take part. We're extremely grateful for all the employers who are able to offer these work experience opportunities to students, and we don't include fees for that. So that's just a little bit of information about cooperative education, what it looks like, how it integrates into the work and learning umbrella, and how it works here at KPU in an administrative sense. We do have another event series that we hold every month where employers who are interested in learning about co-op can attend, learn more, ask questions. And so I'm going to be including some information about that in our email that we send out to all of you after today's event. But if you have any questions, we definitely encourage bringing them to our team, and we're happy to talk more about this topic or just about work and learning at KPU in general. All right. So with all of that said, a little bit of context brought to the table, I'm very excited to be able to pivot now over to our presenter for today, which is Trucking HR Canada. We have Ramon on the call. He'll be giving the presentation. Just a few notes for everyone to keep in mind. Please keep yourself on mute for the duration of the presentation. I did mention that at the top of the call, but I know we had some people join just recently. And this is mainly just to make sure there's no distracting noise for the rest of participants. We want to ensure that everybody on the call today is going to be able to really soak up the great knowledge that's going to be shared about funding. We also ask that you would hold on to your questions until the end of the event when we'll be doing a quick Q&A. You're either welcome to hold on to them and just keep them to yourself, or you can put them in the chat and then we can address them that way too. Either or is totally fine. Finally, as I've already said, if you're interested in learning more about what cooperative education or work and learning looks like at KPU, or if you're just interested in hiring students or learning more about funding, we would love to connect with you after today's event. I've got our contact information here on this slide, and we'll be including this slide deck information in our follow-up email. But we would definitely welcome questions, and we're happy to meet with you, chat with you, and just provide more information as necessary. So now I am going to stop talking and stop sharing my screen, and I am going to pass this over to Ramon from Trucking HR Canada. He's going to take it away for his part of today's event. So Ramon, please feel free to go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to start by sharing my screen here and confirming. Basically, if you could just give me a nod that you're seeing this, Leila.
Looks great.
Thank you. Cool. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Ramon. I'm with Trucking HR Canada, and I'll spend the next little while talking about the student work placement program that we offer, while fully acknowledging the point that was made that, yes, this is the student work placement program as funded by the federal government. There are multiple different delivery partners, but I would definitely echo the sentiment that that doesn't mean every deliver partner has the exact same parameters. So really happy that I can outline ours today and answer any questions you have in that regard. Before I jump into that, though, just a little bit about Trucking HR Canada. We're a national non-profit organization, and I promise this is the only time I'm going to read directly from our slide, but our mission is to advance modern HR solutions that are evidence-based and best in class, ensuring Canada's road transportation sector has the skilled workforce needed for today and into the future. Now, that evidence-based part there stems from the labor market information that we collect and publish ourselves. We also do work on establishing national benchmarks for skills. We are currently working on developing a national occupational standard for truck drivers, for example. And we also convene, collaborate, and recognize best-in-class employers in our sector through our Top Fleet Employer Program. Now, the talent pipeline at the bottom there is what I'll be talking about a little bit more today. Now, given that you're on this call, I think I'll be preaching to the choir here, but please bear with me as I talk about why you should be hiring students. Our sector, by which I mean transportation and logistics in Canada, has a very disproportionate number of members of staff over the age of 55, while those under 25 make up a very disproportionately small number of our workforce. And so, first of all, as a sector, we need more young people. And doing that through hiring current students means that you can get a very talented individual in a job that you currently need someone for, while at the same time exposing them to your organization so that by the time they graduate, which in many cases is within a year or two, you've got an edge on everyone else trying to get this talented new member of the workforce. Now, in order to incentivize you to do this, Trucking HR Canada is able to offer you up to 70% of students' wages reimbursed, up to $7,000 per academic term. When we talk about academic terms, it's exactly what was just outlined. The first 3 months of the year are winter, then the next three, sorry, I said that wrong. Basically, the KPU definition of the terms. January through to April, May through to August, and then September through to December are terms, and so we can offer you up to $7,000 per term. Co-op placements of 8 months are 2 of those terms, and yes, if the student remains eligible, we can therefore fund 2 times $7,000 toward their wages. Now, firstly, in terms of an employer that we can work with, transportation and logistics is a broad concept, and virtually the entire Canadian economy depends on it, and that's reflected in the type of employers we can work with. If you move or store a physical good or help others move or store a physical good, at the very least, we should have a conversation. Now, having said that about the employer, there are some requirements of the role and the student. Firstly, we require the role to be work integrated learning, which is very much the same thing as work in learning as just outlined. So in simple terms, they must still be a student and they must do something that adds value to their studies. The student must work for you for at least 10 hours a week for at least 4 weeks. Now, any co-op placement will meet that, no problem, but I do want to reiterate that other forms of work integrated learning are acceptable under this funding. The student themselves, skipping net new for a moment here, the student themselves need to be either a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or granted refugee status. So in effect, that means that we're unable to fund international students under this program. Lastly, the net new requirement is really there because this program aims to incentivize you to hire more students than you've done in the past. Bluntly put, if you've been hiring 5 students every year, you've demonstrated that you can do that out of your own funds. However, student number 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc., we would love to speak with you to see how we can provide at least 50% of their wages reimbursed. Just to clarify that 50%, that's the baseline of an eligible student. If you provide an eligible student, we can provide you 50% of their wages reimbursed, up to $5,000. However, many students form part of underrepresented groups that are then eligible for that increase to 70%. I imagine the question is going to be asked, what are these underrepresented groups? These are students who are either Indigenous, part of a visible minority, newcomers to Canada, students with a disability, women in STEM, and first-year students. As a side note, this is one of the things that is actually the same across all SWIP partners, Student Work Placement Program partners, so you may recognize those categories. And honestly, on that point, please tell us if the student belongs to any one of those groups, because we have had people miss out on the increased subsidy simply for not telling us. And we do need some reason to be providing you with that increase. Now, when it comes to applying, we accept applications before you find a student and before you gather up documents, as long as you know the role you intend to hire a student into. And a big reason we do that is to prevent a catch-22 where a university asks, do you have funding for this role? And we would ask, do you have a student for this role? And effectively, we miss out on an opportunity here. So as long as you intend to hire a student, we will provide you with preliminary approval, meaning yes, assuming you hire an eligible student, we will provide you with this funding. Now, when it comes to that application, summer term started the beginning of May, and we are very much currently accepting applications for any students you hired since then, and we'll continue to do that for any students you hire until the beginning of August, because remember, we need at least 4 weeks of work within a given term. However, that's not to say that if you have students starting after that date, we cannot fund them. We'd simply be looking at full applications, and those are also open. Now, a key thing I want to do, besides answer your questions today, is share my email address with you. And I really want to encourage you to reach out directly to me to discuss your situation. What I will not be doing, though, is sharing the application link directly. I want to at least touch base once to see what your situation is, make sure you're eligible, and see if there's anything I can do to help to clarify anything before going to that application phase. So I will pop my email. Actually, it'll be in the follow-up that you'll receive, my email as well as our website. If you do want to stay in touch about any other funding that Trucking HR Canada offers, as well as any of our other programs, labor market information, side note stuff for federally regulated employers, because we do a lot of info sessions on that. Our website, the very first thing you'll see is a way to sign up for our newsletter. And I've had one of our partners say our newsletter is the only one they don't immediately delete, which I think is high praise for a weekly newsletter. We really do try to keep it relevant to you. So with that, I will just turn it back over to Liila to go into the Q&A.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ramon, for that great presentation. Really appreciate all that information that you've shared so far. I will open it for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to either raise your hand. You're welcome to unmute yourself as well and just speak up, or you can put them in the chat. While we give people a moment for questions to come in, for them to collect their thoughts, I've got a couple of questions for you, Ramon, that maybe will help provide more clarity.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me, are there any stipulations for the actual work content of what a student's position is? So what they'll be doing on the job that come into it, you have to take into account if you want to receive funding. Like, are there any restrictions on what a student's projects might look like?
Thank you. Absolutely something I intended to say, and then I didn't, and I apologize. In terms of job content, we can fund across business functions. We do not need the student to be in a supply chain role, even though, yes, that is the bread and butter of us as an organization. What we really require is that the role aligns with the student studies. However, many of the students we fund, as an example, are studying accounting and are in accounting roles, are studying HR and are in HR roles. Recently a law student in a legal role. As long as, and that's the key thing for us, the employer has some form of logistics to their operation. That really is the first and most important step for us to determine eligibility.
Okay. All right, that's awesome. Another question for you. Obviously, we're going to be sharing your information, as you mentioned, as we mentioned, so that people can keep in touch with you and send questions your way, etc. But if people are wanting to stay up to date on what Trucking HR is doing, or on the funding when it becomes available, or when things change for this particular program, do you guys have a mailing list or social media that we can include or let people know about so that they can stay in the loop?
Absolutely, yes. So the first thing on our website is stay up to date, I believe is what the button's called. And that is right there when you go to our website, and that's a way to stay in touch. And that's a weekly newsletter we send out. And again, not just about funding opportunities, anything relevant to our sector, and sector I really mean in a broad sense. And so I highly encourage everyone to sign up for that.
Perfect. And, for everyone who's on the call, I can attest to this. I'm on their mailing list and fabulous updates. Very, very good with keeping people abreast of things happening. So definitely recommend checking that out. Last question for the moment on my end. If employers are wanting to apply for future positions, or if they have, they're like, I don't have a need right now, don't have students I want to look for at the moment, but I know that, in 4 months, 8 months, different point in the year, I'm going to be interested in, looking at student funding for whatever reason. Is there a time or a best time when they should be applying for funding? Like, should they be applying, a term ahead of when they want to bring on students, or right when they're hiring a student? Like, what would you recommend for them?
A very good question. So ideally before the term kicks off, and I refer back to the point that you don't need to have found a student yet, but if you know that over the upcoming term, so let's say fall, I want to hire, ideally you'll get your applications in before September 1st. However, I say ideally, I don't say hard deadline. We want to have that conversation with you if after that date you hire on a student, just reach out. But if you do want to have ideal timelines, if you hired someone in summer, let's get it in before the end of this month, so May. If you're planning to hire for fall, let's get those applications in before September 1st. Similarly, same logic, winter, before January, well, New Year's Day probably is a bit unfair, but before the first work day of January, ideally.
Okay. Awesome. That's really good to know. I have one other question that came up in the back of my head, and it's more for those who might be interested in how the funding system works when it comes to distribution. You might have mentioned this already, but does HR Canada receive their funding from a specific source, a specific government department? What does that look like in terms of where the funding that you distribute comes from?
So this particular stream of funding comes from ESDC, Employment and Social Development Canada, so the federal government. I would reiterate we are an independent nonprofit and our governance is not the federal government. However, this funding comes from ESDC. Having said that, the processing of these reimbursements happens in-house, and I'm trying to phrase this diplomatically. Our processing happens fairly quick, and so it's the upside that we can do that independently there.
No, that's absolutely fabulous. And just for clarification for the other people on the call, because you brought up a great point, when we're talking about student funding across the board, if it's coming from the government, generally speaking, a lot of the funding that is shared will be processed and distributed by the organization that is being partnered with. So in this case, we're talking about Trucking HR Canada, but that kind of arrangement applies to a lot of different funding partners, especially with the federal funding, because there's a lot of different delivery partners they've dealt with. Although the money comes from the federal government, the administrative side of things generally happens with the third party funding partner, again, in this case, Trucking HR. So it's a good thing to clarify, because we think government funding, but in actuality, it's delivered, it's dealt with entirely almost with these third parties. And we're so very grateful for that. You guys do great work for our employers that we deal with.
And for what it's worth, our main incentive is that we have committed to getting this money out the door. So what is our incentive? We said to the federal government we'd get it done. So absolutely, we try to be as helpful as we can and as clear as we can. Also, if it's a no and you will not get funding, we try to give you that no fairly quickly, rather than having you wait for that for a long time, just so you know to look elsewhere for funding. On that note, I am in touch with some of the fellow delivery partners of the same program. If I identify another program that would be a better fit, always happy to make that warm introduction.
Fabulous. We love to hear it. I haven't seen any questions come in yet, which is not a bad thing by any means. It just means that Ramon's done his job far too well. But I'll give it a quick moment. I see one question that's just come in from Leah. Thank you so much. They ask, can this funding be combined with another similar third-party partner? And I'm assuming what that means with funding from that particular partner.
Yeah, a very fair question. So the funding for any individual student cannot be combined with another federal government funding source. So no, you cannot get funding from Trucking HR Canada and Electricity HR Canada under the SWIP program for that same student. However, if you are receiving funding for the same student from a provincial source, that does not disqualify you from our perspective. Now, I want to be careful in my phrasing here. Always check with any other funder to see how they would feel about it. But just to give you a sense, if you tick, yes, I'm getting other federal funding for this student, you cannot submit your application. If you take yes, I'm receiving I'm receiving provincial or municipal funding, we just need you to disclose that to us. It's not a disqualifier. But again, that's our side of the coin. Always check with the other funder to make sure they're also happy that you're receiving federal funding for that same student. In a broader sense, if you are receiving federal funding for something completely unrelated, that's fine. We really focus on the individual student and whether you are getting funding toward their wages from other federal sources.
Fabulous. Great answer. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Let's do a last call. Feel free to raise hands, unmute, pop in the chat. We'll give it a minute here. Oh, I see a raised hand from Ricky. Thanks so much, Ricky. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello. I just wanted to know if you guys will be able to share with us the material you presented, and also for Ramon, how do we access that money? I mean, how do we submit applications? I'm not sure if you presented it in your part of your presentation. That's all.
Yeah, do you want to take the first part?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ricky, for speaking up. Really appreciate it. Yes, we will be sharing the information that has been put forward to you today. We have to double check on the PowerPoint, make sure everything looks good and Ramon's comfortable with that. But we will be sending along helpful information at the very least of where you can find basically and have your questions answered if you're wanting to learn more about this particular program. And then Ramon, over to you for that second half of the question with regards to where can people apply?
Yes, so the application platform is Outcome Campus Connect, which may ring a bell if you've accessed other similar sources of funding. So we have a specific link that I will send to you. It is a fairly straightforward application. Just to reiterate, when you go for your preliminary application, all we need is some organizational details and job description, some details about the role, but no documents, no student yet. And so it is an online platform. It is comparatively straightforward, and if you bump into anything, I'm always happy to run through the first application together. But yeah, Outcome Campus Connect. And again, the only reason that I'm not sharing directly that link is I just want to have a brief touch base about your situation to confirm we can fund your student. But after that, honestly, you can put as many through as you want is something I can say right now. I might not be able to say that in about a month's time. So that's why I do want to reinforce, if you do have any students or hiring them in summer, get it in before the end of the month.
Okay, perfect. So the heat is on to make sure that we can get applications in for employers, but that's really good to note. Any other questions? Give it a minute here.
While we're waiting, just a thing on work integrated learning or work in learning. We are always open to hearing you out if you feel it is work integrated learning. I might query it. As an example, I had an employer earlier who did put in a role that had laborer in the title, which generally to me signals not work integrated learning. However, the way they outlined it, it was actually very valuable educationally to a particular student. And so we will be approving that. So I encourage you to think about it. There are limits, and we have said no, but we are always willing to have a conversation. And am I still here? Yes, I am. Sorry. Computer did a weird thing there. On the second point, we do require, for example, proof of enrollment and a document signed by the university. Now, KPU is wonderful about this and probably will have no issues signing that for you. But I just wanted to point out that if you're having any issues there, we want to be a partner to get those documents together. So always just reach out if you're having trouble in that regard, rather than going back and forth with the school 3 to 4 weeks before reaching out to us. Because sometimes we have contacts like Leila, who is like, oh, hey, let me look into this for you. Again, KPU will not have this happen to you, but you might work with other schools as well. So.
Thank you for your very, very excellent reminder, and we'd certainly love to think that that wouldn't happen here at KPU, but no, that's really helpful to note. Every university works differently. Every post-secondary institution outside of universities work differently, so that's good to point out. Now, I haven't seen any questions come through, and that's totally fine. Clearly, Ramon, you've done your job brilliantly. What I will say then is thank you to everyone for attending today. We're so glad to have you on the call, and we hope that today's presentation was helpful. If you have questions about this particular funding source, again, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with Ramon's contact info, and you're welcome to reach out to him, as he has already said. You're also welcome to reach out to our team if you have questions about other sources of funding, how student funding works in general, or anything regarding student hiring and student learning here at KPU. We would love to chat with you, learn about what your company needs, and really talk with you one-on-one to get a sense of how we can address what you're looking for directly. Outside of that, we hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for attending. We're going to wrap up for now, but we hope that you will tune into future events. You'll get in touch with Trucking HR if you're interested, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.